as the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is accused of cutting back repair efforts when he was Chancellor. And the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, apologises for swearing after an interview with ITV News' Daniel Hewitt. Schools Minister Nick Gibb joins us now. Mr Gibb, can we just establish some facts about exactly where we are? You were Schools Minister in 2010. You returned to the department last year. You've said now 156 schools have been identified as having a problem with this weak concrete. But back in March, our correspondent Daniel Hewitt had a Freedom of Information request which showed there were 1,466 schools built in the period, which means that they might be at risk of having that concrete in them. Can you tell us, have you been through all of those 1,466 schools and identified whether there's a problem or not? Or is that still work to be done?
I think it's probably more than that number of schools that were built in the period, the 1950s through to 1990s. That's the period during which RAAC was available. So in March 2022, we wrote to every responsible body responsible for the school buildings, local authorities, trusts, asking them to confirm to us whether or not they have RAAC. Now, the vast majority of those schools built in that period or extended in that period, they confirmed they did not have RAAC. Of the returns that said they suspected they might have RAAC or they thought they would have RAAC, we then sent in surveyors to look at those schools, and they confirmed again, in the majority, no RAAC. And then in the schools that they did confirm RAAC, we then took action at that point if the RAAC was categorised as critical, and then we took action, and that's the 52 schools where action was taken earlier this year or last year. With a change of policy over the summer, new evidence emerging, we're now extending that to the other 104 out of the 156 schools. So it is in a minority of schools. Out of 22,500 schools, the vast majority do not have RAAC. But we take this issue very seriously. We've been proactively seeking evidence about the safety of RAAC. And over the summer, new evidence emerged. And then last week, we took the very difficult decision to extend our concerns to schools that are not graded critical.
Clear about this. In March, Daniel Hewitt identified a list of 1,466. You are now saying you're about to publish a list of 156 schools.
Yeah.
Does that mean that only those 156 schools are at risk and all the other schools in that wider list, the Hewitt list, have now been investigated and you have said there isn't a problem? Or could there be a lot more than 156 schools where parents at the moment don't know whether their children are safe?
Well, I don't know where the number of 1,460... Well,
it was a Freedom of Information request that your department gave to ITV, so you could find out by asking your own department what's going on.
We reply to lots of FOI requests every day.
Yeah, but this was reported on Good Morning Britain on the television in March when you refused to come on our programme and answer questions about it. So you could see why, 6 months on, we're slightly worried you still don't know about the Hewitt list. What's going on?
Look, we've done far more than any previous government or current government in the world in identifying RAAC. 95% of those questionnaires have been returned. We have a deadline of this Friday for the remaining 5%, so some more will emerge from that 5%. But I said, you know, even in all the questionnaires that are returned, the vast majority confirm no RAAC. So 156 is the number of confirmed RAAC cases in our schools. I expect there will be some more from the remaining questionnaires that are to come in. But we have been very proactive since March with the 2022 with the questionnaires. But even prior to that, in 2018, we issued very detailed guidance and a warning notice to responsible bodies, those organisations responsible for our school buildings, warning them about RAAC, how to identify RAAC and how to monitor and ensure that the school building is kept safe, even those that have RAAC.
And so how come that wasn't done?
It was done. I mean,
but you've just said that you're still awaiting 5% of the questionnaires.
No, the response to the guidance by responsible bodies was put into effect. Schools will have responded to that guidance, and which we then updated again in 2021 and 2022. We wanted to go one step further.
I have no idea what you just said. Could you say that again? Because it was entirely incomprehensible.
2018 was the collapse of the ceiling in the primary school in Kent. So why in 2023, at the beginning of term, are we still in a position where there are props holding up ceilings in schools, primary school children being bused to other locations at the cost of thousands of pounds a week, and you're saying you still haven't heard from hundreds of schools about the situation in their buildings?
So from 2018, after that collapse of a school in Kent, we issued very detailed warning notice with the Local Government Association to all responsible bodies responsible for school buildings. That gave detailed guidance about how to identify RAAC, what it looks like, and then how to monitor it. And we kept that guidance updated as evidence emerged of how to identify and look after and monitor RAAC.
Can we just translate what you're saying?
Yeah.
You're saying you did everything you could in the Department for Education in 2018, and it's local councils and head teachers who failed in their responsibility.
Not talking about failure. Look, not talking about failure.
Well, someone's failed, Mr.
No,
Gibb,
they haven't.
because
no,
5 years on, we've got parents terrified of sending their children into school in case the ceiling collapses on their head.
That's because we are being extra cautious, abundantly cautious, because of evidence that emerged over the summer. So in response to that questionnaire we sent out in March 2022, we can confirm that the vast majority of schools do not have RAAC. And where we have identified RAAC through that process, these schools will probably have known about it anyway, but we now know about it, and we took action in 52 of those schools where we sent in surveyors who identified RAAC as being in a critical condition. We took action in those 52 schools this year and last year to make those schools safe.
Are you saying, Mr. Gibb, that you think in 2018 you did absolutely everything that a government department in charge of the safety of our children in classrooms, you did everything you possibly could? Or do you think that you are one of those people, or the other people in the department, are the ones that Gillian Keegan is pointing a finger at and saying, how come people aren't thanking her when everyone else was sitting on their backside doing nothing? Because if I was a parent of a child going into one of these classrooms, when a ceiling had collapsed in 2018, I would be wondering why the government hadn't taken a firmer grip of this 5 years ago.
We did, and all that guidance that we issued to schools was on the advice of experts of the Institution of Structural Engineers. It was in tune with the advice and evidence available at the time. And as more evidence emerged, so we updated that guidance. And then because we wanted to be more proactive as a department, more proactive than any previous government and any other government around the world, including other governments within the United Kingdom, we took the extra step of wanting to centrally know where precisely RAAC was in the school buildings.
But Mr. Gibb, you've just admitted to us that you don't know that even today, after being there for a year and after Daniel Hewitt's report in March, you still don't know all the schools which have got RAAC in. There are some schools you haven't replied. 156 may not be the limit. There may be more schools. There are parents watching our programme whose children are going to schools. The head teacher doesn't know, you don't know, and they don't know if there is a problem in that school.
The responsible bodies have been advised very strongly since 2018 to identify if they have RAAC in their schools.
But you don't know the answer to my question, do you?
Yes, well, look...
There are schools you don't know. Look, there are schools which might be at risk and you don't know.
That's a separate issue about whether centrally we're collecting the information. Since March 2022, we decided, above anything else done anywhere else in the world, that we wanted to have that information centralised. And 95% of responsible bodies responded to that questionnaire, even though the responsible bodies, local authorities, trust, you know as a former education secretary, that they are responsible ultimately, legally, for the school building. But we wanted to go a stage further than was necessary so that we understood the risks.
Centrally, you gave us the information in March, the list of schools, in the Freedom of Information request. 6 months on, centrally, you still don't know whether all those schools have got a problem or not.
We are confident that with 95% of the returns in, with surveyors having gone into schools where RAAC was suspected, we are very confident that we know the vast majority of where RAAC is identified.
Let's just hope your children don't go to one of the 5% of schools where you're not confident, eh?
That you could be confident there too, because the responsible bodies have been given the information and expertise about how to monitor and identify RAAC, even in the schools where we haven't yet received the data. What we were doing centrally was over and above what has ever been done before by previous governments or other governments around the world, because we understood the risk of RAAC and we wanted to take the extra step of having that information centrally. And because we did that, we have managed to then put in protective mitigation measures in the 52 schools that we've identified as having critical RAAC. And now from this summer, from last week, in the 104 schools where the RAAC is not critical, but we're being overcautious.
And just to establish, that 5%, how many schools does that cover, that 5%?
Well, I'm not entirely clear what that number equals, but what we do know is that by Friday we will have all that information.
Okay,
and
the vast majority. How many schools are in the 5%?
Hang on, the vast majority of those schools.
Yes, we understand the vast majority. We're not talking about the vast majority.
You used the term 5%,
will not have
Mr. Gibb.
RAAC. Say again?
You said 5%. How many schools is 5%?
Well, there are different estimates of how many. The responsible bodies know the number of schools in their
You're the schools
that they're
minister.
responsible for.
It's in your name, Mr. Gibb. How many schools are in the 5% that you don't yet know?
Well, look, as I said, I've given you the information.
Or thousands?
It will be. If you look at if you think about the 15,000 or more where we've had surveys in, it's about 1% of that equals the 150.
I would say 5%.
So whatever the number is that comes in,
5% is about 1,000 schools.
It will be only 1%, if that, where RAAC is identified.
Okay, so
we're talking about a very small number still to be identified.
1% is about another 200 schools. I think.
We don't know for certain, but it could be.
Between 200 and 1,000 extra schools over the 156. 156 plus 200 to 1,000 schools more.
Well, you're coming up with numbers out of
I'm listening. When you say 5%, I'm just listening to you.
The evidence that comes in.
Nick Gibb, Schools Minister, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.